Welcome back to another episode of the Security Spotlight podcast. Last week, we talked about some good ways you can improve your security posture from an organization. And we kind of left off the end of that conversation hinting at zero trust, and we touched on it a little bit. But today, we're going to dive much deeper into the topic. And with us, we have on our zero trust expert here, Chris Thomas. Chris, welcome to the podcast. And would you mind giving the audience a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure. Appreciate you having me. So Chris Thomas, go by CT. Some of you may know me as CT. So I'm a technology strategist in our global CTO office, responsible for new product concepts and incubation activities. Prior to joining Dell, Navy veteran communicator, and been supporting U.S. federal government for a number of years, as well as other large, integrated program platforms.
Awesome. We're happy to have you on here. We also have on Steve Keniston, my co-host. Steve, how's it going?
It's going great, Max. Thanks. Great to have another Navy veteran on here. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for joining with us. Haven't seen you since Dell Tech World, so thanks for joining us.
Seems like forever ago now, right?
I know.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into it. So we're going to be covering zero trust today, and I want to be talking about what it is versus what it isn't. So let's start with what zero trust is. Chris, can you define what zero trust is and some of the core principles?
Sure. So zero trust is a framework, a security framework. How it differs with what we've traditionally done is a perimeter-based network approach, right? We bought specific tools to address specific issues or vulnerabilities that we may have in our enterprise. So zero trust, as defined by the DoD, addresses 7 pillars, right? So you end up looking at user, data, you have your application and workload, your device, your network, and then you have these overarching layers, right, for your automation, orchestration, and visibility analytics. And there's certain capabilities within each one of those 7 pillars, right? The DoD defines it around 45 capabilities as named. So an organization would want to look at addressing, similar parallels with that same construct.
Okay, great. So going off of that, can we talk a little more about I know a concept that's really fundamental there is this never trust, always verify. Can you go a little bit deeper into kind of how that plays a role in what you just described?
Yes. So one of the biggest paradigm shifts from our traditional cybersecurity approach, right, with perimeter, you're taking a data-centric approach now, right? So instead, we used to say we have these trust zones, and if anything was coming external, right, obviously we didn't want to trust that. It had to go through your traditional firewalls, you inspect it. But once they're inside the network and they've been allowed, for the most part, we would allow that user, that device, to have free reign as to what resources or data they could go access or manipulate. And this introduces issues to where you have a major risk associated with insider threat, right? If the person was an employee or a contractor, you just assume that after you did your initial investigation on them, right, or vetting process, whatever that may entail, that person was a trusted asset or trusted user. And then that person would have access to whatever they needed to notionally to do their job or day-to-day task. The issue with that became you would have sometimes a disgruntled employee or a person that takes company sensitive information and then they go off to the competitor or they try to do some other malicious activity that's unethical with that company sensitive information or provide it to someone else. Zero trust takes and shifts that paradigm to just-in-time access. You no longer trust a device. You no longer just trust a user every time. You authenticate for every access of the data just in time on a need-to-know basis only. Now, the complexity around that really gets simplified, and we'll talk about it a little more as the conversation evolves, and a lot of the automation orchestration to keep that simple. It's not as complex as some people may think.
Okay, need to know basis. I like that. Steve, is there anything else we need to know about zero trust?
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of interesting. I've heard Chris tell this story, so I want to tee him up. But my wife is this huge period drama kind of person, watches a lot of was it Downton Abbey and that sort of thing. And I always kind of harken back as I'm thinking about security And the zero trust thing, a lot of folks have said, we no longer, zero trust is very modern, right? We can no longer have the kind of the castle and moat analogy. And I always think about, you get invited to a dinner party back in the days of castles, and you walked in the front door, and really you were supposed to go to like the sitting room or the smoking room and have your dinner. But, how often would people kind of just snake off into the little office and kind of see what was written? And maybe the king or whatever was the general, and maybe there's some important information there that you shouldn't know about, right? So I always go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But what does the equivalent look like today? Chris, you've told this story a number of times about kind of what's the modern day zero trust of that kind of look like?
So I would equate it. So let's say you're building your new dream house, great, and we talked about the 7 pillars. So let's count each pillar as a door with the notional lock on it. One thing that you have to take into account to address this in a holistic fashion, right? Zero trust is a enterprise horizontal view, and that's how you're measuring your posture. And it's all predicated on risk. Counter to your point, right? The king or queen, for their bedroom, normally there was armed security guards there, right? You couldn't just walk into their, place for them to their personal space. In the same sense, right? With our private homes, we put locks on the doors to ensure we keep honest men and women honest. So we wouldn't want to have 7 doors on a new build for a house and then leave only 5 of them with locks on them. This approach allows us to look at and have a dynamic enterprise environment. So it simplifies things because the interconnectivity between functions removes the silos that we've had in the past, right? We've all had technical debt to where, yes, I have a subject matter expert for networking, and they're the best person that you can find for it, and another person for storage, and another person for whatever tool. And we end up with tool paralysis. Zero trust integrates all that, or is a forcing mechanism to integrate a lot of those activities and make your enterprise more dynamic. That, to me, adjusts the paradigm to where you don't have to worry about if CT was upset that day and he decided to delete a file that his teammate was working on because he was upset that they, knocked his coffee over. You don't have that issue. It's not as impactful because it's all predicated on risk and what's acceptable. So if you look at it in that simplistic aspect, right, taking that broader view, addressing it end to end, looking at the data, because that's ultimately what it's all about. What components and parts and pieces and means to an end, right? You don't care in most cases what tire is on your car. The average American, right, the average user doesn't even know, right? If they're not doing something special, off-roading or drag racing, things like that, they just know it's a tire comprised of rubber and it fits.
That's all it needs to do.
So we've been kind of dancing around a little bit as we talked about what zero trust is, but I want to address it a little more specifically now. Can we talk about some of the misconceptions or myths surrounding zero trust? Because I feel like we see a lot of them oftentimes portrayed in the media, especially.
One misconception, and Steve, keep me honest here, right? What I've seen, and I've attended a lot of industry shows, and you see advertising and marketecture around, oh, we sell you the zero trust solution. Our singular component provides you zero trust. That couldn't be further from the truth that you can imagine, right? Components, solution providers as it pertains to software, hardware, they fit into your overall enterprise framework. And remember, I said zero trust is a security framework, but no one product by itself encompasses all 7 pillars, all the controls and capabilities and zero trust activities required to say, I have a zero trust environment. Can they complement to it? Can they enable? Do they need to have certain features, right? Certain encryption libraries and things like that, maybe within the hardware and software? Yes, most definitely. But by themselves, a singular solution set or a single product does not meet everything you need to take into account to address zero trust. Steve,
I think you hit the nail on the head, Chris. And between that answer and kind of something you said before, I kind of want to touch on something. So first of all, companies out there running around saying, buy my thing and you'll have zero trust. It's just it's not practical, and I hope most of the industry these days is kind of understanding that. We like to say, what is it? Cybersecurity is a team sport, right? It kind of takes a village here to kind of pull all this important stuff together, right? And it's for that matter, if we shine the lens on Dell for a second, right? We have kind of these different approaches to how we think about zero trust, and we do that purposefully. Now, what gives us the right to be able to do that is because we do provide a lot of the infrastructure components and capabilities, from servers, networking, storage, edge components, data protection, all of that stuff. And that affords us the opportunity for two things. One, we get to talk to a number of customers in these different spaces, and you were talking about these silos with expertise and stuff, and that's kind of where I'm hoping you take this, right? And they think about, the security components you need to make your server infrastructure valid or your networking infrastructure valid, and how does that apply to the zero trust models? What capabilities within those solutions help you advance that zero trust posture for where I'm trying to achieve and fill out all of those needs that fulfill each one of those pillars? And that's one particular approach. And another particular approach is to say, by definition, what does it mean end to end? And then how do we go off and we fulfill that? And we've talked about at Dell, we made a big announcement at Dell Tech World, but furthermore, and I know you spend your heart and soul, right, bleeding this stuff, right, understanding how to kind of get there in an intelligent way that is very helpful to the consumer of the solution, and takes a lot of the burden off, especially during these skills gaps times. So do you want to elaborate maybe on that a little bit?
Sure, most definitely. So, part of it, as we start to look at the components, and you have organization, they have their existing data centers or the additional, their sites. They're trying to go through, right, how do I systematically go through this? How do I know where I'm at on my zero trust journey, right? I've heard that a number of times. And what's required to do that, everything is predicated on acceptable risk. And what's acceptable risk for a retail, customer or retail business is not the same level of acceptable risk for someone in a highly regulated market like healthcare or financial or the government, right? They have a different mission set. They use it differently. Maybe your retail store is all centralized to one country. Great. You only have to look at the regulatory controls for that one country. Somebody that's global, like you said, Dell, we're a global company. We have to comply with regulatory and legal, requirements across the board. And we have teams that focus on that. So as you start to look at this, you start to go through the assessment of what's my data? What's the impact to that data if it was a compromise, right? Because nobody wants to be on the local news or the global news for the wrong reasons. And then I start systematically looking at, all right, what's my high risk, high impact workloads and their associated data? How do I protect those? Are they protected today? Who's consuming and accessing that data? That's how you have to start that approach. And then there's a lot of details around data tagging, data hygiene, looking at the policies for the individual organization and how does that construct, right? Mapping that to what is normal. Right? We talked about, right? We launched this at Dell Technology World as well, generative AI. What is the actual behavior analytics for what's acceptable and normal for CT and his associated devices, his job role and function? Should he be accessing these files at 3 a.m? Should he be downloading terabytes worth of data? Yes, maybe, no. Those are the type of things that organizations have to take into account and start looking at as they go on this journey to truly figure out where they're at today and what other things do they need to do longer term and what's the best approach for them to start on that take.
That's really helpful. And even more so like we were talking a little bit about how the technology components that we're trying to build into each one of our I don't want to use siloed in a bad way, but our siloed solutions, so servers, networking, storage, that kind of apply to the needs that the federal government, the US DoD, kind of applied to hey, what are the activities that you need to have, and the steps we're taking to implement into those solutions to be able to help customers along in their journey, depending on where they are and what they can afford and what they want to afford or want to be able to do or need to be able to do based on their, what's implemented in their environment, vis-a-vis what we're doing with our Project Fort Zero. And that's the one where you spend a lot of your time on. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and one piece I didn't mention, right? So obviously, like you said, Dell's an infrastructure, a technology company, right? And we do more than most people probably think about, right? I think we try to prove that at Dell Technology World, right? We showed the truck and just to show our engineering prowess. Each one of our individual product teams, we're making sure that those have the ability to be integrated into a zero trust architecture. So ensuring that we have the best level of encryption support, making sure we can integrate that with an identity and access management system, right? Your ICAM system, making sure that we can support data privacy requirements from the GDPR and other regulatory controls, right? All of those features, those are rolling and ensuring from a component level that our products are able to support that, right? For existing customers, future customers, right? That's one piece. What we're then doing, and even the supply chain, right? I didn't mention that portion. How we look at our supply chain and verify that nothing has been compromised at a micro level on those individual components. Now you take that and you accelerate and you look at Project Fort Zero. Project Fort Zero is an integrated approach to this, looking at secure and validated infrastructure, right? And then mapping that supply chain and then layering in our cloud fabric and all the other security tools through our ecosystem partners and making that one tight integrated platform to where the customers don't have to go figure out, should I use this ingredient, this component, that component? No, it's all integrated into one turnkey platform that is validated by the US government for use, right? And so this is addressing not just government customers, this is any regulatory market, right? So CISA's put out a lot of stuff around this for critical infrastructure, power, healthcare. It's applicable across the board. And I mean, that even impacts continuity of operation for businesses. So that's what we're focused on now, to bring that to market, to try to make zero trust more palatable and easier to adopt, right? An accelerator button, so to say.
Kind of like that easy button. I hear you. No, it sounds like a very holistic approach. And you used a key term in that, talking about, integrating it across all of our partners. Again, back to your initial point, right? Security isn't, you can't just say, I sell you this and you're all set. It's like we, even Dell, right, have to partner with a lot of people to make sure that we are providing that set of capabilities to a customer so that they feel safe. They feel it's simple. Not too simple, but it's simple for them to implement and they can easily get their head around it and they feel secure and safe.
Exactly. I mean, the biggest feedback we've heard from customers is we have tool paralysis. We're tired of having to try to maintain and keep, a staff of 20 to 50 different SMEs. And sometimes you have to double that depending on the size of the organization because they have to count for, holidays. Life happens, right? We're all still human. So that challenge, they were like, if we could have somebody give us an integrated platform that makes it ease of use, ease of operation from a singular, construct, that helps us tremendously because we don't have the resources to take on that integration burden. They don't have the resources to sustain the training programs that they have to keep, right? We have to all start doing more with less to a degree. And as you look at the commitment, and another good point, right? Our ecosystem partners, right? Dell is great at what we do. We know that, but we also know that we have great friends that are the best at what they do. And we can collaborate together to meet an actual outcome and provide value to the industry.
Yeah, we know what we don't know, right, Max?
Exactly. And speaking of what we don't know, Chris, is there anything else that you'd want to leave as just kind of like a wrap-up closing thought or a piece of advice for our customers who might be, interested in looking at kind of either starting this journey or they're somewhere along the journey to zero trust?
Yeah, just make sure, right, that you're looking at it holistically. You don't want to start a journey or start a program around one pillar at a time or taking right the weary salesman that says, I have the magic pill or the magic water that will solve all these problems for you if you just plan it. it that doesn't exist, right? No one company by themselves can address every aspect of it. And none of our environments, I think that's a piece I didn't say earlier. No customer, no enterprise environment is single vendor. It's not. You're going to have to interoperate and integrate these things together. So, right, we're dealing with a multi-cloud world. That's the reality. Some applications are being hosted in a number of different ways. So take a holistic approach. Feel free to reach out to your Dell point of contacts. If you know me, if you find me, right, I'm more than happy to help as well. And we'll help however we can.
Chris is
Awesome.
good. He gives good advice.
Yeah, he does. He does. And thank you, Chris, for coming on and joining us in the podcast here. And for anyone listening, if you want to learn more about our Dell Technologies security solutions, visit us at dell.com/security solutions. And please check out more episodes of the Security Spotlight podcast. Please like and subscribe. Chris, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.